Live from the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences in beautiful downtown Raleigh, it's the Science Cafe with your host, Chris Smith.
Hi, everybody. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Science Cafe at the Daily Planet Cafe at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. I hope you're excited to be here tonight. I certainly am. We certainly are from the museum because we've got a really good show planned for you tonight. In fact, we have a great show every Thursday night right here in the Daily Planet Cafe. Right? It's kind of cool to go out, right? You come to downtown Raleigh, you get in the Daily Planet Cafe, you get your dinner, you get a nice drink, you have a seat, and then you get to learn something new, right? At least I hope you're learning something new. Or you get to interact and interface and meet people who are scientists or people who are professionals who are interested and passionate about science and nature, which, you know, hey, if you're here, you're probably in that crowd, right? You're at least a little bit interested in these things. Or maybe you just really like vultures, and we're going to hook you in with all the great science and nature stuff too, right? Anybody here who's just straight up vulture fan? Yes! Yeah, how can you not love these incredible birds, right? You see them on the side of the roads. They're always hanging out nearby. They're like your best friends. They just hang out. Or they're like that good friend that just cleans up after you all the time. Oh, a couple of you laughed. You know what I'm talking about. Well, tonight our special guest is going to teach us all about vultures. Our special guest is the Assistant Park Manager for Lake Crabtree County Park and President of the Wake Audubon. Please put your hands together and welcome to the stage, Colleen Bocon.
Thank you, Chris. So I did not see near enough hands go up during that whole who's a fan of vultures thing. So we're going to fix that by the end of this presentation. Expect at least double the hands by the time I'm done. So yes, I am definitely a fan of vultures, and you're about to learn why. Before we get into our local species, which is what we were touting for the talk, I wanted to give a little global perspective on vultures. So we have 23 species worldwide, and they are divided into two groups: the Old World vultures, which reside in Asia, Africa, and Europe, and then the New World vultures, which are our guys here in North, Central, and South America. So here in North America, we have three species: the California condor, which hopefully some of you are lucky enough to see, and then our two local species, which we'll talk about in a minute. But on this slide, Old World is represented by the hooded vulture. It's a little hard to see with the size of the picture, but it looks really creepy and kind of mean compared to the New World vulture, which is the lesser yellow-headed. And when it comes to Old World versus New World, the Old World is sort of like the tough vultures of the group. They actually seem more raptor-like than our vultures, so they have stronger beaks, usually a little more intimidating looking. A lot of them actually have talons. Our New World vultures, not so much. So if we ever had like an Old World versus New World for real, we would probably lose that fight. As a whole, though, they do belong to one big family tree, so they're in the same order. So you have Old World and New World belonging to the same order, which is Accipitriformes. That's as much Latin as you're going to get out of me tonight. But they belong to a group that includes eagles, various hawks, and kites, which is that third picture. Some of you may not be super familiar with kites, very cool birds, also raptors. And then recently, around 2007-ish, some new DNA sequencing happened where they suddenly decided that New World vultures are actually closer related to storks than accipiters. But since then, they've done some even more testing, and they've disproven that again. So we're going to kick the stork out of the family tree. There's still apparently some debate about this, and if you Google it, you'll still see articles claiming that vultures in the New World are definitely still related to storks, but I tend to believe our ornithologists that say not so much. The reason why they thought they might be related and they started to look into that direction is that they share some common characteristics that I don't want to give away just yet. So to our local species, and there are two of them. So we have on the left our turkey vulture, and on the right is the black vulture. So for those of you that are not birders, you're probably thinking, oh, super easy. You can look at these guys, and turkey vultures have red heads, and black vultures have black heads. Done. But those of you that are birders in the group know that when you're out looking at birds and trying to distinguish between them, they never sit really close to you, and they definitely just don't sit next to each other and wait for you to figure out which is which. Usually they're like way up in the sky, flying around, or way up in the top of a tree with terrible lighting, so you're going to have to know more than that. So a little closer inspection, you'll notice that turkey vultures tend to be more brown looking. They are black underneath, but throughout their wings and their back, they have sort of a brownish color overall. And black vultures truly are black throughout. So any feathers they have are going to look black, especially when they're perched. But we're going to get even deeper because I'm a bird nerd, and that's what we do. So we'll start with the turkey vulture. I love this picture. He's so cute, right? Laughter? What? Where is the love? It's one of those, a face only a mother could love, or strange people like me. So looking closer at the turkey vulture's head, they have a very pale or white tip to their beak. And sometimes, if you're lucky enough, you can see a little bit of a pale eye ring around the eye. But again, the main feature is that really bright red head. You'll notice they seem to have really big nasal cavities in their beak. And pay attention to this because the black vulture does not have this. And this is because turkey vultures use their sense of smell to find their food. And they're actually among the best smelling or sense of smell birds in the entire world. See what I did there? Yeah, some of you are paying attention. So this becomes really important. They have really large olfactory bulbs. So most birds are known for not smelling, but in the case of a lot of our New World vultures, and especially the turkey vulture, they have an excellent sense of smell. And there's been tests done where they can actually smell a carcass buried 6 feet underground. So that's a pretty impressive sense of smell, if you ask me. So again, close-up of their face gives you a few clues. But in flight, there's a lot of things that you can pick out to try to identify which vulture is circling you, which you might want to know, could be important. So the top photo shows the underside of their wings, and so they give off sort of a two-tone appearance. So the whole trailing edge of their wings and their tips are all a paler color than that black center. So this is what you're going to be seeing if you're looking up. And then a lot of times, as they fly, they hold their wings in what we call a dihedral, which is an upward V. So they're not going to hold their wings out flat. They're actually going to be tipped up. So they sort of look like a flying V, V for vulture, as they fly around. And another characteristic of flight is that they tend to sort of tilt back and forth a little bit when they fly. So when they're up catching those nice thermals or other air currents, they like to sort of do a little dance and tip back and forth a little bit. So they have some style when they fly. The black vulture, on the other hand, again, thinner beak. These birds are smaller than turkey vultures overall. They actually weigh about the same, about 4 pounds apiece. But the turkey vultures just tend to look bigger and have bigger bodies overall and are a little bit longer. And in flight, the smaller appearance of the black vulture kind of holds up as well. So first thing you're looking at is that pale area versus the black. So with black vultures, the only pale area you're going to see on the underwings is at those tips. And in general, they tend to have shorter wings, so their wingspan's about a foot, foot and a half shorter than a turkey vulture's. And then the other big difference is the tail. And I'll go back to the turkey vulture in a minute, but if we look at the black vulture, they have shorter tails, and a lot of times it has like a rounded appearance on the back end. And it doesn't really go past their feet. It sort of meets where their feet are in flight. And compared to the turkey vulture, they have a much longer tail, so the tail far extends beyond their feet in flight. So again, you can kind of look at that overall shape of how long the wings and how long the tail are to sort of tell the difference. And as a birder, it took me quite a while and a lot of vulture watching to really get comfortable at seeing these birds way high up and saying, that's definitely a turkey vulture, that's definitely a black vulture, and sometimes I just go, vulture. Nature doesn't always cooperate. All right, so talking a little bit about their ranges, they do differ a little bit. So we're lucky enough to have both of these species here, but the turkey vulture is much more adapted to colder climates. So you'll see that range map on the left is for the turkey vulture. That orange or pink section is the breeding or summer season, and then the purple on both maps is year-round. So both of them are found year-round throughout the Southeast, all the way through Central and South America. But the turkey vulture will actually migrate pretty far distances. So those that are especially up into Canada and the northern areas of their range will migrate through, and sometimes they'll kind of stop here in North Carolina on their way down to Central and South America. With the black vultures, a lot of times they will stay in their areas year-round. They might do short, sort of localized migrations. So they might decide that North Carolina is getting a little too chilly, so maybe they'll move down to Florida or maybe just into Central America. But a lot of times we might actually see groups stay here year-round. What's interesting is even within these larger ranges, where they're roosting, so where they're spending their evenings and resting before they find food the next day, they both sort of differ in how far they'll fly around on a daily basis. So turkey vultures are known to have a range of about 150 square miles, which is a lot of flying for food. And black vultures are a little lazier. They only do about 75 square miles. But 90% of the time, they're only going about 6.5 miles tops from that community roosting area. So within their localized range, they're really not traveling too far unless food is scarce, and then they really go for it. So within these ranges, they can be in a variety of habitats. So as soaring birds, they of course need very large open areas, and they both prefer open areas that are also near woods. Because again, as a vulture, you have two things you do most of the day. You're either soaring around or you're perched, whether it's on your food or in a tree. So you sort of want both. So that's why we tend to see them in a lot of parks and open areas that have both of these habitats in close proximity. So for example, where I work at Lake Crabtree, we have a really big lake, and we have a resident vulture population, mostly blacks with a few turkeys mixed in. But they basically kicked out a whole big group of double-crested cormorants a few years ago. There was this turf war over all these trees by our fishing pier, and the vultures won. I don't know if they, used some of their special adaptations, but they definitely kicked those cormorants to somewhere else. So again, they can be found in big areas of water as well. And yes, they do bathe. So for those of you who think they're really gross all the time, not true. They bathe just like all the other birds out there. All right, so in the world of birds, you have the huge spectrum of nest builders. You have these amazing birds like bowerbirds that have intricate nests that people do videos about because they're just amazing, and architecture galore. And then you have the other end of the spectrum, which are sort of the lazy, non-existent nest builders, and that's where the vultures sort of land. So they will basically scratch out a spot on the ground and drop some eggs. So call it a day. Next. So their nesting locations can be on the ground, so they might be in a thicket and find a nice protected area and just decide, this'll do. The picture on the left is a turkey vulture nest that's in the bottom of a hollowed out tree. But again, if you look closely, it's basically just some dirt and probably whatever material was already there when they found that spot. And on the right are some cute little baby black vultures, and they are actually in an old abandoned barn. So they will use old buildings, especially if they are abandoned or sort of falling apart and not visited by people a whole lot. When I worked at Eno River State Park in Durham, we actually had some very old historic home sites, and the first time I ever saw vultures nesting was in one of those old buildings, which was really neat. So again, a little bit of variation on where they nest, but for the most part, pretty bare bones nest in itself. They can also nest on cliffs and caves, but in this neck of the woods, we don't have a whole lot of those. But if you go out to the mountains, you may see them nesting in those types of habitats as well. Typically, both the turkey and the black vultures lay 2 eggs, sometimes 1, very occasionally 3. And most of the time, at least 1 will make it to adulthood, not always both when they lay the 2 eggs. And again, as I mentioned, the turkey vultures are the cute white ones. Baby black vultures tend to be more beige. They do only nest once a year, which is different than some of our smaller birds. And that's because turkey vultures, like a lot of baby birds, like to milk it. So even though they are flighted after 3 months, they like to hang out and let mom and dad take care of them until they're about 8 months old. So when you have an 8-month-old following you around, you don't really want to have more babies because it's already like a lot of trouble. So that's why they typically only nest once a year, and sometimes they'll even nest every other because it's just so tiring they decide to skip a year probably. I mean, that's my guess. So again, the babies, the eggs are typically incubating for about 28 to 40 days. So they're staying in that nesting area for quite a long time. One interesting difference is apparently turkey vultures do not like neighbors. So they will make sure that they're nesting at least a half a mile apart from one another. Although black vultures don't really mind, and so they'll nest much closer together and sometimes within the same building or in the same general area. Black vultures are the party vultures. They like to hang out in big groups much more. Speaking of groups, so group dynamics. There's still a lot to be studied and discovered about the social interactions of both of our vulture species, but we do know some things. We know more about black vultures than turkey vultures because with them being social, and also the fact that many of them mate for life, so they will pair bond, and they don't migrate as much, so people can actually study the same group of vultures for extended periods and get to know individuals. So within black vulture groups, they can form huge groups of 200 to 300, and they have found that in many cases, most if not all of the vultures within that group are somewhat related to one another. So as a result, they're very good at working cooperatively together, which comes in handy for food. So finding your food, sharing your food, looking for good roosting areas. Turkey vultures will also form groups, but in much smaller quantities. So you'll see small, almost family-sized groups of maybe 4, 7, 10. You don't really see huge groups of turkey vultures like you do with black vultures. But in this picture, it might be hard to tell, but you actually do have both species hanging out together. And this is because there's interactions between the two species that come into play for both of their survival, although more the black vultures. So we mentioned how the turkey vultures have a great sense of smell. And so they're usually the first ones to find carcasses. They can smell things from very far away. They can be very high up in the sky. And the black vultures use this to their advantage because they don't have a great sense of smell. They have pretty good sight, and if left to their own devices, they can find food doing that. But they actually like to just follow the turkey vultures to their food. And because they have the numbers and they tend to be more aggressive, when you see both species at a carcass, you'll see all the black vultures on the dead deer and all the turkey vultures sitting over to the side looking kind of sad and pathetic because they just got beaten up by all the black vultures and they have to wait their turn to eat. Which is really interesting since turkey vultures, like I said, are bigger, but apparently it's all about the numbers. So yeah, black vultures tend to have a bit of an attitude, apparently. And again, within the groups, you'll have a pecking order. So there'll definitely be alphas that probably eat first, but they do make sure if it's a large enough carcass, everybody will get their share. It's when you get to the smaller stuff that maybe things get a little hairy. So a couple interesting behaviors, one of which is you may see vultures doing this either on the ground or up in trees. They are catching some rays, so there's a couple different reasons for this. They're actually warming themselves up for the day, so much like reptiles and a lot of animals, they're using the sun to sort of warm up, get going in the morning, and this is also allowing all those parasites that they might have picked up to sort of crawl up to where they're feeling the heat too, and then they can pick them out of their plumage and preen themselves really well. You'll see a lot of birds exhibiting this behavior. The first time I saw a blue jay doing this at the park I worked at, I thought it was injured until somebody explained to me that's what they were doing. This is a little bit before I became quite the bird watcher that I am today. But a lot of birds do exhibit that behavior. And turkey vultures tend to feed and look for food in the afternoons, so they're my kind of bird. They kind of sleep in the morning and hang out and warm up, and then they kind of decide to start, doing what they need to do around lunchtime. So speaking of lunchtime, we've already kind of touched on it, but their main source of food, if you didn't already know, is dead stuff. So dead animals of any variety, they are not picky in that department. It cannot be super fresh, though. We don't want it to be too fresh. They like it where it's been out for a little while, and that's because their beaks and feet are not very strong and not very sharp, so they don't really have the ability to tear into things like, a cow's hide, tougher areas. And I'm not going to get specific, but let's just say that they use certain openings to get started because obviously there are places where you have an opening into a carcass to start with, and I'll just leave that alone there. So if you want to ask about that later, I guess we can get into it, but maybe we shouldn't. But anyway, a lot of times if they find a carcass and it's not ready, they will remember where it is, and then they will actually fly back the following day and check it out and make sure that it's just right. Interesting difference, black vultures, because they do have such large groups to feed, tend to stick with larger carcasses. Turkey vultures, however, can be seen feeding individually and will actually, if they find one little dead squirrel on the side of the road or something else small, if they're able to get away from all those black vultures following them, they'll eat something on their own that's small just for them. All right, so speaking of eating dead stuff, you have to have quite the gut to process that. And one of the amazing things about vultures in general, and ours in particular, is that they have one of the most acidic stomachs out of all animals in the world. So battery acid comes in at 0.8 on the pH scale generally. Of course, the most acidic you can be is a 0, and all of the research I read is that turkey vulture and black vulture stomach acid is somewhere between battery acid and 0. So you can basically eat whatever you want when your stomach acid is that bad. So their stomach acid is about 100 times stronger than ours. So yeah, I didn't get an exact pH on ours. Good question. He asked what our stomach acid is. I know it's 100 times stronger than ours. So yeah, we should not go around eating dead things. But the great thing about them eating all this dead stuff is that stomach. So they're able to process all of the diseases and bacteria and any other pathogen that would be found on carcasses that would otherwise get into the environment. They're digesting that, and their stomachs are actually neutralizing or killing all of those things. So in a study done on vultures, they took samples off vultures' faces. I believe this was a turkey vulture study. And they found about 528 different pathogens on their face. Then they took a sample from the gut of that same animal, and there were only 76. So that's the difference between what they kind of take in and what they're processing in their bodies. So that's alleviating a lot of disease and nasty stuff that would otherwise potentially reach us or other animals. We have a lot less epidemics because of our vulture friends. Don't you love them yet? Now we get into the good stuff. I tried really hard to find a picture of a vulture barfing on the internet, and I was very sad to discover that it's impossible. Apparently photographers just don't go for that sort of thing. I'm not sure why. So the best I could do is a couple of vultures looking like they're dry heaving. So you can sort of add the rest in, use your imagination. So it is true, it is not a myth. They do in fact use projectile vomiting as a defense, which in my opinion makes them one of the coolest animals on the planet, and that's why I have a special place in my heart for them. Plus I teach kids, and anytime you can work vomit or poop into the conversation, it's a really good day. So these guys are my go-to animal. So they both do this. They can projectile vomit their last meal, because it's still sort of hanging out, not quite gone yet, several feet from their body. I will say though, if you're nervous, I have been very close to a lot of vultures at Lake Crabtree, and they have never once projectile vomited at me. And I've had kids get even closer than me thinking, oh, here it comes. No. So I think you really have to push them to get them to projectile vomit. You probably don't want to do that. But I'm just saying they don't go around willy-nilly projectile vomiting. And it makes sense because, you all just ate your dinner. You don't want to go throw it up and then have to eat again. So same thing, they're wasting energy. They're wasting a really good meal. They want to keep that for only emergencies. Yes. Projectile vomiting questions.
Given how strong their stomach acid is, if you get projectile vomited on by a vulture, would it give you burns or something?
Yeah, good question. He asked about maybe getting burns from the vomit because it's so acidic. So everything I've read is that no, there's no bad effects like burns. And the only way it would negatively affect us is if we actually breathed it in and it reached sort of our gastrointestinal system, because it's probably not going to be good on your tummy. The worst case scenario would be it getting into your bloodstream. So if you had an open cut, because then all those pathogens that might not have gotten processed are now potentially entering your system. Sure.
The second question is, thanks.
The second question is, how do they avoid harming their own throats with their stomach acid?
That is a great question, and one I do not know the answer to, because I thought the same thing. I thought, when I've had to throw up, it does not feel good. You get that really burning acid feeling in your throat, and I'm thinking, my gosh, 100 times worse than that. I don't know how it doesn't just eat through their esophagus. That's a great question, but I honestly did not see anything about that. It's a good thing to Google later. I will check that out. All right, enough about vomit. Let's move on to poop. All right, so for those of you who get this song reference, bonus points. It's one of my favorite songs, and when I saw this on the internet, I about fell out of my chair. I was so excited. So the other cool and gross things that vultures are known for is pooping on their own legs and feet. There are two excellent reasons why you would want to do this as a vulture. One is that when it's hot out, you're getting some evaporative cooling from that nice liquid that is draining down your legs and feet. So it's like an instant cool off when you're not near the lake or the pool. The other reason is it's actually sort of like hand sanitizer, but we'll call it foot sanitizer, because again, all of that stuff that they've processed has mostly been neutralized, and any parasites or pathogens they've picked up by standing on dead stuff as they eat, they just sort of washed it all away. So it's like built-in hand sanitizer. See, I don't know why you guys don't love these birds. They're amazing. If I was going to be a bird, I think I might want to be a vulture. I don't know. I'm starting to get sold on this idea. I wanted to make sure to mention and kind of really push that point home that, vultures are one of many animals that get a bad rap. I try to make it my mission to educate folks about these, not very appreciated or liked animals that really do us great services, and vultures are definitely at the top of that list. Again, mentioning, all of those pathogens they remove. So they've actually taken out things like rabies, botulism, anthrax, cholera. So in places where these are, very real epidemic potential, they're really helping out both human and a lot of other animal populations. So they are definitely the cleanup crew and then some. So again, and I don't know, I think they're kind of cute, but maybe that's just me. No, Joanne thinks they're cute too, see? It's not just me. There's other strange people out there, and we have found each other. All right, so I know we're going to get into the question and answer section next. So I was going to do a little trivia to kind of segue into audience participation. So when you're talking about groups of vultures, there are different names you can call them. I love murder of crows. There's all these cool animal group names. But you can actually have multiple names for vultures based on what they're doing. So does anybody know what you call a group of vultures soaring in the sky? You can shout it out. Don't be shy. Kettle. Very good. Yes. Like a kettle of fish or a tea kettle. All right. What about if they are at a carcass? This is my favorite. A group of vultures at a carcass. Bump. No politics in my talk, please. Now I heard another answer for the other one, but wake, very good. I was gonna say it's a very fitting. Did you just Google that? I was like, all of a sudden I saw a phone and then an answer. Good thing it's not trivia night. Okay, and then finally a group of vultures roosting. Somebody said it. Committee, yes, very good. You guys would totally win at trivia. Excellent, good job. All right, so now with that, I'll give you a Gary Larson Far Side cartoon because they're awesome, and then we will get into questions.
Let's give Colleen a round of applause. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
That was great. I loved that. All
You
right.
love vultures now, right?
I have always loved vultures.
Yay, high five.
Oh yeah.
See? Team
Back-
vulture.
I used to do nature hikes and canoe trips, and I could always count on the cliff face of the
Yep.
river being covered in vultures.
See?
So they were guaranteed a great thing to talk about every weekend.
And it keeps the kids in line because I always tell them that the last kid might get eaten by the vultures, so it keeps them all moving. Little tip for you nature educators.
Well, okay. All right, let's move to Q&A. I know you've got questions. Hands are already going up. If you're new to the Science Cafe, here's how it works. Katie and I both have microphones that we will pass around the room. So every now and then, wave at us. We'll try to get to as many questions. We have a lot of time left. This is great for discussion. And let us get a microphone to you before you ask your question. That way everyone in the room can hear.
Is it on? Hi, that was fascinating.
Thanks.
Can you tell us what the cartoon says?
Yes. So it's two vultures sitting in their nest, and one's on the phone, and it says, "It's the Websters. They say there's some pitiful thing dying of thirst out their way, and would we like to come over?"
Nice.
Thank you for speaking on my favorite topic.
Yay!
I've noticed turkey vultures appearing in freshly plowed fields, and you can't see big carcasses. My guess is that when the tractors come through, they're killing lots of little mammals, and it becomes kind of a smorgasbord. Is that what's happening?
That would be my guess as well, yes. Yeah, because I know anytime we do mowing or anything like that on a large scale at the park, there's lots of little animals that are unfortunately getting chewed up in the machinery, so that would probably be my guess as well. I don't know for sure, but it seems logical to me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Got one here.
Thanks for the great talk.
Sure.
So the differences between turkey vultures and black vultures are a lot of them, and some pretty big ones.
Yes.
But I wonder where these differences arise from in kind of the evolutionary
Right.
sense, because they're problems of eating and reproducing not so different, and they have different ranges.
Right.
But how do you explain all the ways in which turkey vultures and black vultures have become so different?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I didn't really dive too deep into how they started to sort of branch off from one another in that sense. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure they're still fulfilling different niches just from where they are located and the way they're getting food and sort of their group dynamics. But yeah, beyond that, I don't really know the best way to answer that question.
Thanks. I was essentially going to ask the same thing. Why would they coexist? I was essentially going to ask the same thing. Why would they be coexisting in the
Right.
same environment? They don't seem terribly different
Right.
to me, just from what you were saying.
Yeah. I'm sure the turkey vultures wish they didn't coexist sometimes.
Question about how do vultures fare with animals that have been poisoned or shot with lead shot?
Yes, so I did not touch on threats to vultures because I figured it would come up in conversation. So those are still some of the big reasons why there are many vultures in decline. So out of the 23 worldwide species, there are 14 that are either threatened or endangered. And so our California condor is an example of the lead poisoning. That still happens. I read some articles about how in Africa, poachers are now purposely poisoning carcasses of things like elephants and other things that they're taking items from, because the vultures will basically give away where these carcasses are, and so they're looking at the vultures as snitches, and so they're poisoning carcasses after they've harvested what they want to kill vultures off so that they don't have to worry about them anymore. And then there's a lot of concerns about different antibiotics, all kinds of different agricultural poisons and chemicals, anything that's getting into our cattle or hogs or anything else that they might eat agriculturally is bound to affect the birds. And even if there's a medication that's working for the cattle, that same amount going into a bird is going to have much worse effects. So those are definitely two of the big threats that they face right now. Fortunately for us, our local populations are on the increase, and they don't seem to be stopping anytime soon, but they still face threats like wind turbines. They'll occasionally run into electrical wires as they're soaring around. And there's still, the potential for poisons of different types as well. Sort of like, owls get poisoned because we're putting out rodenticides. Same thing with a lot of the vultures.
Couple of things. First off, you might appreciate this. I don't know your musical taste, but there's a hard rock band called Hailstorm. They have a song called Black Vultures.
Okay,
and
I'll
there's
check
a line
it out.
in it that says they're circling the sky and then pick off the pieces. So anyway.
I will definitely look that up. I'm excited.
Second thing, your comment about roosting behavior, I guess that explains what we saw out in Nebraska where my in-laws live. There's a tower there, and we're like, why are those vultures just, and it's kind of close to the evening and stuff, and they're just like probably 50 or 60 vultures on this tower that are just, there. And I was like, oh, I guess that's someplace so I guess that's something they do. They just, at the end of the day, they just kind of go there and, and
so,
it's just a regular place for them.
Exactly. So when they find a roosting area that they like, whether it's a tree or a tower or your roof, they stick to it for as long as they can unless somebody deters them from that area. And because they are mainly a social animal, they're going to roost in groups. So, and yeah, it can be a little freaky for people that aren't really vulture lovers yet and not quite sure why there's 50 of them sitting on their house every night. Could see how that would be a little unnerving.
Who fulfills their role outside of the ranges that you showed?
That is a great question. So there's, lots of other scavenger animals. A lot of them are smaller, like our insects and things. But yeah, there's no other bird that necessarily fully, keeps that niche in place. We do have lots of mammals that will occasionally scavenge when they need to. But yeah, I'm not sure why they're not found everywhere. My guess is initially, that range where the turkey and black vultures were not was sort of covered by the California condor. And of course, with their populations dropping, a lot of that's open now. But again, they're in every continent except for Australia and Antarctica. So most of the world has some sort of vulture coverage, which is a good thing.
Over here. Hi, thanks. Great talk. I noticed that on the turkey vulture, the nostrils seem to go all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
Is that unusual in birds, and does that contribute to their keen sense of smell?
Yes. So yes and yes. So I don't see a whole lot of beaks where you can kind of see right through it, especially as big of an opening as it is. And I think that definitely allows much more of the scent and air to kind of pass through. So yeah, that's from what I could find, that's exactly what's going on there.
And a second question, do they soar at different altitudes? Or do they stay more or less between the black and the turkey?
Yeah, so black vultures are known to soar higher than turkey vultures. And a lot of that is because they're spying on them. So, as the turkey vulture is soaring and tracking that food, the black vultures are going up high, at least the lead bird, and sort of trailing them so they can watch where they're kind of honing in on. Good question. Yes, in the back.
So you mentioned black vultures as being in big groups and stuff. Do turkey vultures roost together too?
They do. So, and they'll even roost the two groups together. But I have seen, groups of turkey vultures between like 5 and 10 roosting at times, but definitely not in quite the numbers as black vultures. And the group that we see regularly at my park, it's very much like a 75% black vulture, 25% turkey vulture, but they all stay in the same group of trees all together. So I guess the black vultures at least give the turkey vultures some peace at night and don't beat up on them too bad.
Hi, Colleen. It's rare I hear anyone talk about birds. Thank you. I have a question that's a bit social characteristics. But do vultures eat dead vultures, or do they have any kind of reticence to do that?
That is a great question. So I did not see anything specific about that, but one of the humane ways of getting rid of vultures is called an effigy program, where they're hanging fake dead vultures in a tree to sort of move them out of areas that people don't want them. So my guess is they would probably be hesitant to eat one of their own, since it seems like they do get upset seeing a dead comrade.
Well, but I have a second question to that on the other side of the coin. If they're hungry, do they off one of theirs?
Ah, man. Kathy's going right for it. I like it. Oh, and by the way, the joke about not hearing people talk about birds, she's basically married to the ornithologist here at the museum. So yeah, she hears about birds all the time. So I did not see anything in my reading about them killing each other, especially for food source. One interesting tidbit, though, is they don't just eat carrion and dead things. Black vultures have been known to kill very sick, weak, small animals and will occasionally eat baby birds and bird eggs. Turkey vultures, not so much. They seem to stick strictly to the dead stuff.
I'm bringing one up from the back.
Okay.
So I can say on the last question that they definitely eat other vultures.
Oh,
They
good.
won't kill them, but they will eat them.
They'll eat the dead ones.
Yeah.
Thank you for clearing that up.
I see a lot of them. I volunteer at the Carolina Tiger Rescue, and we have like a huge amount of them. But my question is, because I've fed the tigers, and I'll have like a big bucket of chicken, and the vultures will surround me. I've counted like 150 of them.
Yep.
Why will they not attack me for it? They'll come up to me, but they won't do anything.
Yeah, so, you know, even other raptors, they tend to be smart enough to not tangle with very large mammals. So I think they still see us as, you know, enough of a threat that they're not going to be aggressive towards us. They're going to wait and kind of go for the easy things. But that's a great question. But yeah, there's really no documentation of them attacking people or large, healthy animals of any kind. I think that's just not their style.
Hi, very good talk. But I haven't heard the word buzzard.
There's a
tonight.
reason.
And why is that?
So yeah, I knew somebody was going to ask, so I'm prepared. So they are called buzzards by quite a few people. Sometimes buzzard is known to have a negative connotation. You know, like if you call somebody an old buzzard, it's usually not a nice thing. And that kind of holds true. A lot of times those of us that love vultures think, oh, you know, you don't call them that. That's just rude. But it's just a leftover word from Old English. So when the settlers came over from Europe, there's actually a hawk in Europe called the common buzzard. It's an actual hawk. It's Buteo buteo is the scientific name. And because when they came here and started to see vultures, they just started to call them buzzards because that was the most familiar thing that they reminded them of, and it just sort of stuck. So it's just another one of those sort of common terms that you can call them. But again, I like to just call them vulture because I feel like it's more respectful.
We'll have a second part very quickly, but somebody actually answered it. I have a committee of black vultures at my farm, and one of them unfortunately landed on an electrical transformer, and he didn't make it very far.
Yep.
But then I looked up, and there's a spread out, and then I noticed probably a week later there were bones on the ground. So maybe they do clean up from, you know, friends.
I was going to say, so further proof they eat their own. See,
Yeah.
I learned something too. That's great. Because again, I couldn't find anything about that on the great internet, but this is why personal stories are very helpful.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll take a picture and maybe send it to you.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
I will gladly accept any vulture pictures anybody wants to send me.
Do crows are they not a carrion eating?
They are, definitely. Oh, yes. Crows will basically eat anything they can get their beaks on. They're not picky. I like them too.
What is the predator for vultures?
Excellent question. So they don't have many because nobody wants to tangle with poop and vomit. Go figure. But during my research, I came across a little anecdote from DuPont State Forest. They had put a wildlife cam outside of a cave where they knew turkey vultures were nesting, and they have footage of a bobcat coming out of the cave with one of the adults in its mouth. So, you know, some of our mammals that would be a logical predator for birds, especially if they're on the ground, could potentially be predators for turkey vultures, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of predation on them compared to other birds, partly because of their size, but also partly because the animals probably know what they're up against. So there's easier things to tangle with, I would think.
Do you think the bobcat was seriously starving? That's why he did
I don't know. I don't know if it was like, look at me and I can do whatever I want kind of thing, you know, like he got some cred for it, or if he was just really hungry and thought, I know where that vulture lives, so I'm just going to go for it. Good question. Have to ask the bobcat. I don't know.
Hi, I've got a couple more questions. So with smaller animals like, say, a dead squirrel, will they just swallow the whole thing?
I've seen them feeding on smaller carcasses, and it still seems like they're picking it apart and kind of swallowing chunks.
So my second part is is there anything they don't eat, say bones? Because he mentioned there were bones left over.
Yes, so they do not have the beak strength to like chew up or sort of break bones. So some of the old world vultures are pretty hardcore like that, but not our two species.
I know the bearded vulture.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like some of them have nicknames like bone crusher and things like that because they do have that capability. But with ours, they're going to pick everything else and just leave the bones at the end. So that's why basically that's all that's left.
So do they follow the normal raptor rule of the female being the larger of the gender?
There didn't seem to be a whole lot of size difference from what I read. If any of my bird friends want to correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, so they tend to be the same size for both black and turkey. There's really no obvious difference. So again, like when you're looking at a big group of them, you can't really pick out male versus female like you can with a lot of other birds. And even the coloration, there doesn't seem to be a lot of difference where you can pick them out.
And my other question is, because you've talked about them, the two different kinds hanging out together sometimes, is there any evidence that there's ever been any interbreeding?
Yeah, so it's funny. So I did a practice run of my talk, and one of my coworkers asked me that question. I thought, I didn't actually see anything about that. So I did a little more digging, and there's one random, like personal article that somebody put out there claiming that they found a hybrid between a turkey and a black vulture, but it didn't seem to have a lot of like basis, and I could say for sure. My guess is it might be possible, but I have not personally come across anything that says that that's definitely happened. But it seems like it would be a logical thing that could happen. So.
I notice the vultures seem to like to soar, and they don't really like to flap like a hawk would do. So I noticed on like a cold, rainy day where they can't get any thermals, they just sit there. So I'm assuming, does that mean they just don't eat that day? You don't have to wait till the next warm, sunny day to get to flying around.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, not only are they lazy nest builders, but they're lazy flyers. So they do use the thermals and air currents and do mainly gliding. So you'll see them flap, especially when they're taking off from their roost to sort of get up to where they need to be, and then they really do ride those thermals and air currents most of the time. And so yes, on really crummy weather days, like a lot of other animals, they just sort of hunker down and wait for it to be over. So they must really have to eat well the day before and the day after maybe. So yeah, great question.
I was watching Nature last night, and they were talking about king vultures having a 7-foot wingspan. I didn't hear you say what the wingspan of our vultures are, and are the king vultures really the king and they're the biggest ones, or condors beat them?
So for our New World vultures, the king vulture is the king as far as being the biggest, both overall size and wingspan. So our turkey vultures have a wingspan of about 6 feet, and black vultures range between 4.5 and 5.5 feet.
Okay, one other question. I noticed that my dog doesn't bark at anything. I'm out in the woods, except vultures. Huh. Do other animals really avoid them or think they're nasty or something like that?
That's a good question. I don't see them hanging out with a lot of other birds and animals. So, maybe like humans aren't the only ones that are not giving them enough love. They're like the unpopular kids in the corner kind of thing. I don't know. That's a great question, though. It's interesting that your dog picks them to bark at, though. There's not something about your dog you don't know, is there? Like, does he smell funny?
Hi, so you mentioned there could be problems when there's a lot of vultures and not enough food.
Mm-hmm.
Do they the whole group go out at once when it's time to feed, or do they take turns, or how does that work?
So a lot of times there is a lead bird in a group. So if it's a turkey vulture, or even in groups of black vulture, there'll be maybe 1 or 2 lead birds that sort of go out and locate the food, and then the rest sort of follow. And this is especially true for younger birds, so they'll sort of follow older, more experienced birds to a carcass. But they tend to sort of start, a lot of times it's interesting as a bird watcher, you'll see 1 or 2 vultures sort of circling in a spot, and then they sort of keep increasing in numbers. So I think a lot of them, as long as they can still have sight of their lead birds, they'll kind of wait and see, and they must have some sort of signal that they use to kind of know, like, okay guys, we found something, it's time to eat.
I'm curious, what about roads? I mean, roads in wildlife conservation are often problems. And I drive the highway a lot to and from work, so I see owls and hawks dead on the side of the road, but I can't remember ever seeing a dead vulture that had been hit by a car.
Yes. So I actually picked up this tidbit from John Gerwin's talk a couple weeks ago when I watched it. So same thing. I every once in a while have seen a dead vulture, but that's after a lot of driving on a lot of different roads. But it seems like between being very large and visible, and again, they're out during the day, where our owls especially are out at night, and they will zoom really quickly across the road. A lot of times when hawks and owls are hit, it's because they're moving and the car's moving the other direction, and that's the collision. But with vultures, they're already sort of hanging out mostly on the side of the road. So I think between being visible and people not really wanting to hit them, but also kind of hippity hopping out of the way in time, it just seems like the car collisions are not as big of a threat for them as some of the other raptors. And if anything, highways have actually helped our vultures. So I'm always really sad when I see roadkill of any kind. But the one group of birds that has actually benefited from all these extra highways and roads that we have as humans have built are the vultures, because all those other things that are getting hit and killed is easy pickings for them. So it's a constant source of food, which is why their populations are probably expanding as our road system expands. So,
Colleen?
Yes.
What is the lifespan for these vultures?
Good question. So black vultures can live up to 20 years in the wild, and turkey vultures are a little bit less of a lifespan. They go up to about 16 years. But it has also, I saw something that also mentioned they can live up to about 30 years in captivity. So if they're well taken care of, they definitely add quite a bit to their lifespan.
I think I'll get the last one.
Okay.
Halloween is in 1 week, and I'm hard-pressed to think of a Halloween scene that doesn't include a vulture. So I get the connotation, the association they have, say, in North America.
Mm-hmm.
Do they have similar association around the world?
Yeah, so a lot of the world does not look kindly on the vultures. A lot of those same sort of misconceptions and attitudes sort of are pervasive in a lot of areas. There is in India, there's actually a group, I think it was Parsi, that for, ages, they have actually relied on vultures because to them, you don't bury people or carcasses. It's actually polluting the soil and the environment. And so they actually really revere the vultures and leave even human bodies out to be fed on by vultures. And so they sort of have a special connection to them as an animal. But of course, that's a very specific group of people. Most of the world is, we're still sort of fighting those misconceptions of them not being all that great. So trying to get the word out about them being our cleanup crew and really helping to save a lot of our lives and other animals' lives is really important. So
let's give Colleen one more round of applause. That was amazing. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. All right, so who loves vultures now? Yay! My job is done.
And hey, if, I think you can probably just go outside tomorrow, look up and spot a vulture around here. But if you definitely want to see what one looks like, come visit us here at the Museum of Natural Sciences, where we have them on exhibit, not alive, but we have them where you can see them. So come visit us here, check things out, and make sure you're here next Thursday night too, which is actually Halloween. We've got a science cafe on Halloween night. We're doing the science of monster myths. Science behind monster myths with museum researcher Roland Kays. It promises to be a lot of fun. I want everybody in costume. I might be. You have to come and see for yourself. We'll see you again here at the Science Cafe. Thank you, Colleen, and thanks all for coming. Good night, everybody.